Hello everyone, I hope quarantine is treating you well. Today I'll be showing you a short presentation on the Metalsmith Myra Mimlitsch Gray. So Myra, a little bit about her. In 1984 she received her BFA degree from Philadelphia College of Art. And in 1986 she got her MFA degree from Cranbrook Academy of the Art. Then in 1998 she was awarded the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching. And in 2014, she was named by the Metal Museum of Memphis, Tennessee as a Master Metalsmith, and this is where she presented her first museum retrospective called Staging Form. And in 2016, she was recipient of the American Craft Council's Award and was inducted into their College of Fellows. And on top of all that, she's been awarded several individual fellowships and grants in crafts and sculpture. And an interesting fact, 2 of her pieces are currently on display at the Smithsonian, as well as many other pieces on display in several other locations. This is one of her pieces. It's Sugar Bowl and Creamer. It's part of her series called Bisections and Encasements, where she investigates the means of reproduction and decorative arts. This one is one of the ones on display at the Smithsonian. This is another one on display at the Smithsonian. Now ahead of time, I will mention that she has such a great deal of work out there that I simply could not cover each piece. This presentation will mostly cover her metalsmithing rather than her jewelry making. She has a great deal of jewelry, but I'm more interested in her metalsmithing because you can really see her process and understand the thought and intent of her work when you're looking at her bigger series. So in 1990 and 1995, she produced a series called Bisections and Encasements. To me, this series is reminiscent of her interest in the arts and crafts movement. You can tell she's speaking about the reproduction and creation of objects and viewing that process as a fabricator or a creator rather than a consumer. So this is an encased teapot. So she's really talking about the connection to the history of metalworking and what this series meant to her through that. Alright, so before I go on at this point, I feel like I should take a brief moment and explain the arts and crafts movement for those who may not know about it. In short, this movement lasted from around the years 1860 to 1920. From those dates, you may be able to tell that this movement was created in direct response to the Industrial Revolution. Artists of this time associated factory production of goods with a decline in the standards of these objects and a decline of safe and rewarding workspaces for the craftsmen. So the work created in this time was definitely heavy on letting you know that a craftsman made these objects. And there was a heavy tie to the design of objects because a lot of the things being produced didn't have the consumer in mind or a design in mind. They were just reproduced repeatedly, even if they were kind of crappy. This is another piece from the arts and crafts movement, and notice the mark making on these pieces, which is what I think it's important to connect this and talk about it slightly before moving on to her next series. So Mimlitsch Gray continues her dialogue with the arts and crafts movement further with her next series of work from 1997 to 2001 called Magnification. Now, in interviews with Mimlitsch, she often mentions her childhood where she had a significant role in the building and construction of a summer home with her brothers. She often recalls her job of straightening nails for reuse and long days of construction of this home. Like her family just bought the materials and they put their kids to work. This is where I see her connection to the arts and crafts movement a little bit. Her connection to craftsmanship, material, and like the end product. And here she's like magnifying her talk about the arts and crafts movement. In her quote here, she even says, "This work interrogates sentimental ideas about the craft and the handmade," referring to the arts and crafts movement as a stylistic trope. Some more work from this series, and I think that this one is interesting because she's done this form of a server in other series, but she reworks it and does it in like a completely different material, talking about something completely different, which I think is interesting. So in this quote she says, these oversized presentation pieces serve as craft propaganda, conjuring notions of domesticity, labor, and industry. So she's really like amplifying the thing about the arts and crafts movement that made it like about craftsmanship, which is the mark making. Here's two more pieces from this series. She's got a hanging wall mount, and she has a few cups that she does. Okay, in 2002, she did conflation. I think she spoke best about this piece by simply saying the stuff on the shelf becomes the shelf. Just bringing back that interview I encountered where she talks about her childhood a little bit. And also the arts and crafts movement. I think she talks a lot about these things and uses objects that are decorative or may not really have a use besides decoration, and she really reworks them and talks about that. When she says the stuff on the shelf becomes the shelf, she also says the customary display object has been undermined and reassigned as a bolster for the next new thing. So it's really talking about how things develop and the evolution of materials and decorative arts over time. Here she says, I clustered a collection of kitschy copperware into a useless mass. I inverted this conglomerated still life to form a mantle. The resulting display reinterprets utility and also recasts these objects as subterranean or subordinate. This one I thought was really cool. I just like the whole form of it. Alright, and in 2002 to 2008, she talks about she doesn't talk about it, she does. She melts silver. So she often recounts having to straighten nails for hours on end. And I think when you think about the life stages of silver, it's similar to draw a line between her doing that as a child and then working with silver. If it isn't useful, it's then made into something useful, or can be made into something useful. Here she shows silver's simple unwinding into a liquid form, while also showing that it can be reborn into any form. And she mentions even here, this quote's really good, bittersweet, this work portends silver's demise, but also its rebirth, as the material has been transformed throughout history to re-image new societies. So a quote from her here, these raw objects are contingent, reflecting the anxiety of service. So she's talking about the repurposing and reuse of silver and its constant flow between these stages of servicing other people. And I've never really thought about silver in a way, and I think that's interesting. And like I mentioned previously, she revisits this form of a server on the right here. So I feel like she covers the bases of just so many things. Like, she makes sure she really works with something and understands the material, and then she can just revisit it and talk, and then it's just so interesting to me. Okay, and here's a quote from her. Again, she's got a lot of really good quotes. Sometimes the trace of making is simply the way it is. Tools leave marks, or it can be an aesthetic device, an evident signal to provoke the viewer or user, operating from a position of skill. I choose when this trace is passive or active, and whether it provides clues to the content I'm pursuing. In this way, the mark is literally crafted and it functions ideologically. So here she's talking about her choice to leave marks on a lot of her pieces. And I think it's another talk about how once you master a material, you can then do whatever you want with it. Instead of accidentally making an amazing piece, you've already worked this material to the point of where it's like working with your own hands. Like, you understand the impact that's going to happen when you do a certain thing to this material. And I think that comes with the area of probably being a master metalsmith. But it also shows you that like practice over time allows you to really create your best work. Here we have some of her jewelry. Most of her collection was created in the 90s. These pieces like stuck out to me and left a strong impression, so I figured I'd include them. And then here, these are some of her pieces, no doubt created in the processes of understanding her melting silver series. Now the cluster prong ring was created a little earlier, but I think the form and the imagery of this piece might have been a slight foreshadowing to her work of like melting these metals and creating pieces from them. And here's a group shot of her studies in working with enamelware. She seems to have used these as ways to work with and better understand enamel, much like she does with other materials. These works, I believe, are her recent examples of working with enamel. Part of her process is understanding a material and its limits completely, so she worked with it in different forms, shapes, and pieces to see what the end result would be. And I think it's super cool. I'm not sure how she enameled like that, and I don't even, just something I have not fully even grasped yet, but I'm sure Marissa knows. So we can talk about her process here. This is one of her process photos on her website. I just like that there was pizza in it. So Mimlitsch Gray's process involves extensive 3D models of the piece she's creating. Each time she creates a model, she creates it out of different materials, and her end result often has traces of the materials she worked with, which will make more sense later. In this case, the traces of the mark making made in her clay sketch are important details in her final form. So this is a picture of her studio with a quote, "My current impulse is to study the effect on the material when acted upon, and then to make this the model for the object. Stretching, pulling, pushing, peeling, these basic physical effects have been imagined and translated into metal forms. The resultant forms reside on the horizontal plane." So she's definitely talking about her extensive work with a material before she creates a final piece in it, you know? Here's a paper model, and then also a copper model of the same piece that she's working on. And it's just, you know, it shows the great length of detail she goes into when creating this. Like, she fully creates a form out of copper. And then here we have her sketching in clay, done as well for this specific work. In order to create the previous models, I imagine she first had to become inspired through working with the clay. Because you can see in the final silver, it's a lot of those carving marks. So I'm thinking like the traces that she left behind on this piece were more from working with the clay. And the final piece here, you can even see this curly like little Q on the right and the one on the left in the back. Those are definitely reminiscent of her just simply working with clay. So she leaves traces of her mark making in other materials onto her final piece, which I think just goes to show you she's really like encompassing, like working with every single material. Okay, so thank you for your time, and I hope the rest of you enjoy your quarantine. Stay safe, and here's my bibliography. Have a good day.